Hi everyone, my name is Jack, and today we're going to look at another horrible case. Jealousy is a terrible, often destructive force that can blind a person and push him to crime. It was jealousy that caused the tragedy that played out in Costa Rica a few years ago. This case went down in the history of forensics as the case of Gerardo Cruz. But let's talk about everything in order. Samodi Fonsek was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. About her family and early years are known a little. The girl's childhood was in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother named Sonia Fonsek. Samodi attended one of the local schools, and even then demonstrated her difficult and conflicted character. She did not tolerate rejection, often achieved what she wanted by force or deception. According to the memories of local residents, Samodi, thanks to her striking appearance and perfect figure, easily charmed men, but could not keep them. Samodi was very beautiful and skillfully used her appearance, but because of greed and vanity, put material wealth and self-interest above all else, which simply discouraged cavaliers after a short relationship. In addition, she was incredibly jealous and aggressive. In her youth, Samodi Fonsek, thanks to her doll-like appearance, worked for several years in the image of Barbie in one of the large bookstores of the company Universal. It was then that the girl received such a flattering nickname, firmly entrenched behind her for life. Soon after graduating from high school, Samodi had an affair with a successful journalist who worked on local television. The man's name was Osvaldo Fernando Baleri, and he was 16 years older than her. It was the longest and most serious relationship Samodi, but the chosen one never made her an offer. In 1996, the couple had a common son, Christopher, and a year later their daughter, Christina, was born. But because of constant scandals and attacks of jealousy Samodi, Baleri left the young woman. In 2012, 53-year-old Osvaldo died suddenly, and, as it soon turned out, he did not enter the former lover in his will. The young woman was not going to put up with it, and decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to the house of a former lover and actually seized it, changing the locks there so that relatives and heirs of the deceased could not get in. In addition, Samodi took some valuable items belonging to the deceased. The Baleri family members were quite outraged and immediately went to court to punish Samodi for the theft. The police forced the young woman to leave the house, but criminal proceedings against her were not initiated. Fonsek had many other romances in particular, with one Miguel Angel Perez, from whom the woman gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Maria. According to some reports, this relationship was officially registered, but ended in divorce after a few years, although other sources claim that Samodi was not married. At the same time, she gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent. It is a curious fact that some lovers of Barbie mysteriously disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, but for a long time, for some reason, no one paid attention to it. So, for example, one of Samodi's lovers went missing, and according to relatives, it happened soon after he decided to break up with an irascible and aggressive lady. The man to this day has not been found, and many are sure that Fonsek is directly related to this case, but some irrefutable evidence of her guilt could not be found. Samodi's other former lover, whose name was Diaco, died tragically after breaking up with her. He was murdered, and everything looked like a failed robbery attempt, and the mysterious killers were never brought to justice. Again, everyone speculated about Samodi's involvement in the crime, but no hard evidence was found against her. However, her most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, he was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. His own father, the boy did not know, because he left the family before the birth of his son. His mother, Ana Patricia, soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted the baby and raised him as his own, and a few years later, Gerardo had a younger sister, Milena. Childhood and youth of the guy can be characterized as a calm and carefree period. He studied at an ordinary school, was fond of motorcycles, and early met his true love, a girl named Carol. At the age of 23 years, Gerardo, along with his chosen one and their common daughter, 4-year-old Genesis Cruz, settled in the house of his aunt and uncle in the metropolitan suburb of San Sebastian. The young father took a job at a local bakery to provide his family with everything they needed. The couple was quite happy, and soon they learned about the upcoming addition to their family for the second time. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samodi, who periodically shopped at the bakery where he worked. At that time, the woman was already 40 years old, but she was still quite attractive, loved to wear frank outfits and flirt. It is worth noting that with age she began to have affairs with men who were much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably flattered her. Despite the almost 20-year age difference and the presence of a family, Cruz quickly became infatuated with a beautiful woman and began to secretly meet with her. She herself began to visit the bakery almost every day to be able to see her young lover, which did not escape the attention of other employees. In addition, Samodi often appeared accompanied by her eldest daughter, Cristina, who was 19 years old at the time. At first, Gerardo managed to masterfully combine family life and secret meetings with his mistress, and so that none of his women did not realize the existence of a rival. But soon Gerardo, as they call it, lost his guard. Obviously, he wanted to boast of his success with women, and he began to tell friends and colleagues about Samodi, about what she is a terrific mistress and spoils him with gifts. Rumors quickly reached his mother, who tried to reason with her son and convince him to leave his mistress. The affair lasted only a few months and broke off in October that same year, 2015, when Samodi found out that the lover had a pregnant wife and a young daughter. The woman was furious. She started calling and texting Carol, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo if he didn't belong to her alone. Gerardo managed to beg his wife's forgiveness and keep the family together. As for the former mistress, he did not take her threats seriously, believing that she would quickly cool down and find a new boyfriend. He did not even realize how insidious and vindictive Samodi would turn out to be. Just a few days after the breakup with Fonsek, Cruz became an accidental witness to a blatant scene. As the young man was walking down a downtown street, he saw a certain older man trailing behind a young girl, holding his phone in such a way that the camera was positioned under her miniskirt. The guy was outraged. He also took out his phone and started filming what was happening, then stopped the girl and told her about everything, advising her to go to the police. Cruz then chased after the man, trying to capture his face on camera. He chased him for about 2 minutes, wondering loudly if he was having a good time taking pictures of the girl's underwear without their knowledge, until the man jumped into a cab and drove away. That same night, Gerardo posted the video he had made on his internet page, and in just one night, the video went viral, as users quickly identified the elderly man as a former official, an employee of the Ministry of Finance named Luis Sulmano Delgado. Soon, the video was picked up and circulated by the media, and Gerardo himself became a national celebrity. The young man was interviewed almost daily for print publications. He was invited to television and radio programs. He talked about the incident he had witnessed, condemned the actions of the former official, and said that he had no regrets about his action and would do it again. At the same time, experienced lawyers hired by Sulmano Delgado began working against Gerardo, accusing him of wrongdoing. They claimed that the distribution of the videotape made by the guy violated the law and were preparing a lawsuit against him in court. Cruz himself was quite surprised by this turn of events and did not understand why they can judge him, and not the man who committed such a disgusting act against an innocent girl. Gerardo gave his last interview on October 7th on the air of one of the local radio stations. He was sure that he was right and believed that he had nothing to fear. The next day, Gerardo had arranged to meet with his friend Oswald after work, but he abruptly canceled the meeting, citing a sudden emergency. As it later became known, that day, he received a message from Samodi, in which a young woman tricked him into coming to the park in the evening, where he was supposed to be interviewed again. Gerardo didn't even suspect anything wrong and simply believed his former lover. After the end of his shift, he went to the agreed place, but there were not journalists waiting for him, but 2 unknown men who took away his bag, beat him and stabbed him several times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. The injured man, before losing consciousness, managed to call his friend and report what had happened, and the latter immediately called the police and medics. Thanks to his prompt action, Gerardo was taken to hospital, where doctors fought for his life for 42 days. During this time, Gerardo underwent dozens of operations. But alas, to save him failed. On November 19th, Cruz died in the intensive care unit. Since shortly before the tragedy, he became a real celebrity. His condition, without exaggeration, followed the whole country. Gerardo's relatives periodically gave interviews in which they asked all concerned to pray for his recovery. They themselves did not understand who and why could do such a thing to Gerardo. At the funeral of the guy came a lot of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. Also, everyone expressed hope that the police will quickly get on the trail of the killers, and they will be fairly punished. Initially, there were several versions of the crime. The first was that it was a robbery murder. Indeed, Gerardo was attacked in the park in the evening. His bag was taken away and he was stabbed with a knife, so that it looked like a common thief. However, just a few days before, Cruz had released a sensational video compromising a nationally known former official. Hence the second theory, a revenge killing. The media openly said and wrote that Sulmano Delgado could well have hired hitmen to remove the young man who had spoiled his reputation. The murder was hotly debated in the press, and people picketed the streets demanding that the killers be found and jailed. The police began to put forward and consider different versions, as well as to look for other possible enemies and ill-wishers of Gerardo. For several months, the investigation stood still, until in May 2016, a video from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The footage shows two men running away from the scene where Cruz was fatally shot. These men immediately became prime suspects, but it was up to the police to identify and track them down. The tape turned out to be a key piece of evidence, and once it was made public, the case moved forward. It was repeatedly played on news programs, asking viewers to look closely, because these could be dangerous criminals. In addition, the police were able to draw up rough sketches of the wanted men and describe their anthropometric data. Soon the identity of one of the men was established because he himself decided to surrender to the police and cooperate with the investigation in the hope that it will help him to mitigate the sentence. Thanks to the information he provided, the investigation quickly came to several other accomplices, as well as the organizers of the crime, Samodi and her daughter Cristina. Soon all participants in the crime were taken into custody. In addition to the mother and daughter, several other men were arrested. Cab driver Ronald Archie, who found the perpetrators of the murder, laborer Cesar Chavez, who acted as an intermediary, and a young minor who was directly involved in the attack. Omar Costa, who had been following the victim and reporting his whereabouts on the day of the attack, was also later arrested. The roles and connections of all the participants in the crime were established through phone calls and text messages. The murder was ordered by Samodi, who had planned the whole thing carefully, including her daughter Cristina in the details of the plan. Together, they turned to their friends Ronald and Caesar to help them find a couple of hitmen to kill Gerardo and make it look like a robbery gone wrong in a night park. They were later joined by Omar, who had to make sure the victim went to the agreed-upon location. Samodi chose the date of the massacre herself, October 7th. On that day, she repeatedly contacted all the participants in the crime, assigned roles, and made sure that everyone followed the plan. In addition, the young woman demanded that after committing the crime to bring her something of the former lover's belongings as evidence. Cruz, after working his shift, headed straight for the park. He was sure that he was going for an interview, so he tried not to be late for the meeting. But at the agreed place, he was attacked, stabbed several times, and then took his bag and jacket, which were given to the customer as evidence. The main evidence of Samodi's guilt were the text messages in which the murder plan and the roles of each of the participants were described in detail. The woman was so confident in her impunity that she did not even bother to delete them. The motive for committing such a grave crime was banal jealousy. The woman did not want to share a lover with his wife, and decided that if he was not with her, then no one would get it. She thought everything through and involved in her criminal plan her own daughter, who helped her in everything. Mother and daughter were immediately taken into custody, and the fact that to release them on bail was out of the question, because the criminals would probably make an attempt to escape and leave the country. Their accomplices also ended up in pre-trial detention, except for Omar, who was in charge of surveillance. And the youngest participant in the crime was handed over to authorities specializing in juvenile delinquency. The investigation lasted about a year and a half, and only in December 2017, the trial of all participants in the criminal conspiracy began. In addition, it turned out that Samodi had previously been brought to criminal responsibility several times. In particular, she was arrested for forging documents to receive state payments, but then she got off with only a fine. In addition, the story of Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Samodi's youngest daughter, has surfaced. As it turned out, the young woman gave the child's surname of a former lover without his consent, and then, through the court, obtained from him the payment of alimony, which she received more than 3 years. When it turned out that the whole procedure was falsified, the swindler was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a large fine. But the court took into account the fact that she had a small child and commuted the sentence to a suspended 5-year sentence. At the trial, the wife of the murdered Gerardo admitted that she knew about his affair with Samodi and that the former mistress had threatened him with death, but he did not pay much attention to the threats. The main motive of the crime, as already mentioned, was jealousy and wounded pride of the woman, who could not accept the fact that her young lover preferred to stay with his wife. Thanks to the records of phone calls, it was found out that the mother and daughter planned the crime together. It also became known that after the release of the very CCTV footage that captured the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was on the verge of going to the police to confess, but she calmed her daughter, assuring that the investigation will never come out on them. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Samodi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald and Caesar, received 25 years in prison each. One of the killers went to a juvenile detention center, and the second was not found at that time. Omar, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. The family of the victim received $140,000 as moral compensation. After the announcement of the verdict, the relatives expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment for the killers of Gerardo. However, it soon became known that the lawyers of Samodi and Christina appealed to the appeals court to mitigate the sentences. The new trial took place in November 2019. At the same time, the identity of the second killer became known, who, according to Ronald, took part in the massacre, but was not privy to the details of the plan. Ronald and Caesar also appealed to the appeals court, hoping to reduce the sentence. As a result, the sentence for each of the participants in the crime was reduced by 5 years. Now, Samodi is serving his 25-year sentence in one of the women's prisons in Costa Rica. As it became known in the summer of 2020, she registered a marriage with a woman with whom she met in prison. Her chosen name is Lindsay Diaz Lopez, and at the time of registration of the relationship, the one has already managed to leave the prison walls, released on parole, while Samodi will spend almost 2 decades behind bars. Thanks for watching. Jack was with you. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead. See you again.